time once again for Community Forum, and we're very lucky to have with us live in the studios this morning Kristin Rowe-Finkbeiner. Kristin Rowe-Finkbeiner is an author, a freelance journalist, and consultant in the field of environmental policy and political strategy. She is the co-founder and executive director of MomsRising.org, a 150,000-member grassroots organization dedicated to promoting family-friendly policies around the country. She is the author of 2 books, The F Word, Feminism in Jeopardy, Women, Politics, and the Future, and The Motherhood Manifesto, What America's Moms Want and What to Do About It. And she is also a contributor to several recent books, including The Maternal is Political, Women Writers at the Intersection of Motherhood and Social Change. Let's start out, if you could, tell us about your organization, Moms Rising.
Well, MomsRising.org was started Mother's Day 2006 on a great day to start an organization for moms. And it was started really to address the issues that mothers and families in our nation are coming up against. Issues like paid family leave, issues like childcare, issues like healthcare, and issues that we all share together but really needed a grassroots force for change in order to move forward. And so we are for mothers, and we are also for anyone with a belly button. So anyone with a mother can be involved in MomsRising.org, and our members are fabulously active and effective. So we're really excited to be working on this.
And talk about as well your book, The Motherhood Manifesto. Is there some overlap between the issues covered in that book and your organization?
Absolutely. Joan Blades and I co-wrote the Motherhood Manifesto. And what we did was we looked at a detailed assessment of what's going on in America right now for American mothers. Just as a side, a background, 80% of American women have children by the time they are 44 years old. And so we're talking about a huge portion of our public that are mothers. And so we looked and we said, what changes do we need? What needs to happen? And we wrote about it in that book, which of course everybody should check out. And then when we finished the book, we decided that the next step was absolutely to work for change. And so Moms Rising really came out of the detailed research, the assessment, the women's stories that were in that book and are in that book. And actually, there's a documentary film on the book as well, which you can get through our website. It's very good. It talks a lot about the families and the stories.
And in your book, The Motherhood Manifesto, and on the MomsRising.org website, you use the acronym MOTHER to represent your specific goals. Can you talk about that? Sure.
And actually, I think the listeners, if you are up this early, there's also a stretch that you can do along with this. You can make the sign of the M. The acronym is for Mothers, MOTHERS. And if you put your hands above you like YMCA, make an M over your head here, then and you can go along with us. But M is for maternity and paternity leave, which is paid family leave. And the United States, just as an aside, is one of only 4 countries in a Harvard and McGill University study of over 170 countries that doesn't have some form of paid leave for new moms. We joined Papua New Guinea, Swaziland, and Liberia with the dubious distinction of not having paid family leave for new moms. O, which, okay, people who are awake here, we got to do the O stretch. You put your hands above your head, make a big O. O is for open, flexible workplaces. T, you can just put your arms out. People, we're doing the morning stretch still, is for television and other after-school programs. H, sad to say you need a friend to do this stretch. You have to put your arms out to the side for healthcare for all kids. E is excellent childcare, and I'll let you all figure out how to make an E with this stretch. R is for realistic and fair wages. And S is for sick days paid for all, and together it spells mothers. And those issues were chosen not because they happen to make an acronym that spells mothers, but because we know that in countries with those policies and programs in place, they don't have as many women and children living in poverty, and the wage gaps, which we can talk about, it's pretty significant, are lower between men and women, and particularly between mothers and non-mothers in countries with those policies in place. So we chose those policies on purpose, not just because they make a great stretching exercise, but because they make a huge difference in our economy.
All right, well, let's go into some of those in a little more detail. Talk about the wage gap, because I had heard once upon a time women make about 75 cents to a man's dollar. And I'd had the impression that that was improving, but after reading on your site, I have the impression it's not improving.
Yeah. Yeah, well, the wage gap it's very interesting. So it's about 77 cents to a man's dollar overall for all women. However, when you look at the breakdown of what's happening with who, you begin to see patterns that need addressing. So women without children make 90 cents to a man's dollar. Women with 73 cents, and single moms make about 60 cents to a man's dollar. So when you go back, you're saying, how the heck did it get to 77 cents on average? It's when you go back to that statistic that I said at the very beginning, which is that 80% of American women have kids by the time they're 44 years old. You see, what's really happening with the wage gap between men and women is that the mommy wall, the maternal wall, is pulling it down. And so right now what's happening is that the primary barrier to women's equality in our nation is children. Right now, 56% of college graduates are women, right? But we still only have 5.6% of our Fortune 500 top earners are women, and only 16% of our U.S. Congress are women, which is behind 72 other countries. We are nowhere near the top in terms of where we are in women's representation in national legislatures. So what's the barrier to the glass ceiling? What's holding us back in the women's movement? Where are we having trouble? Well, the trouble is the maternal wall, which we just saw in those wage statistics. The issue is that many women, in fact, most, cannot hurdle the maternal wall to get to the glass ceiling. And so what we see is there was a study last year, which wasn't 50 years ago, wasn't 10 years ago. This study last year found that with exactly equal resumes and job experiences, exactly equal, but slightly different bio sections, women without children were hired, well, I should say it backwards. It's easier to say it this way. Women with children were hired 79% less of the time than women without children. And so what we have is we have a huge discrimination factor against moms in the labor force. And because of that, women are offered, with children, are offered lower pay. And we see this over and over again. That same researcher at Cornell University found that women with children were offered $11,000 less for a high-paying job than women without children. But she found that fathers were offered $6,000 more. So we really see that this is something that is current, this is happening. And we also see that there are strong paths towards solutions, very good solutions. And that comes in the lovely MOTHERS stretch of policy changes, which the majority of other prosperous industrialized nations, frankly, have passed. And their families are doing a little bit better. We can talk a little bit about families, how many are in poverty, in the impact of that, which is that right now, before the economic crisis, a full quarter of families with kids under 6 were living in poverty. A quarter of families with children under 6 living in poverty. And that is just absolutely ridiculous. I mean, we have a situation where the impact of this maternal wall is having, it's at a crisis point for our nation's families and children, where we now also, just broadening the field, a baby is now born every 41 seconds without health care coverage. Having a baby is a leading cause of a poverty spell in our nation. And we have significant problems with kids coming into school not ready to learn, and then having to do grade repetitions and ending up needing a lot of support along the way, that if we had made early interventions and helped those families and those mothers, we would not have to spend the amounts of money that we have to spend as a society later. So these are cost-saving measures that can also significantly help the economic engine of our future, plus help our kids and families.
And you have some actual numbers for that where I believe it's $1 spent during the early years saves.
Well, you know, that is the big question, because I've seen studies, $1 spent during the early years, say, for example, for early learning, saves $7. I've seen it save $28. I've seen the number of dollars that are actually saved from early interventions is never a small return. You know, I mean, the statistics and the studies always show a big return. And the return is because of, well, for example, let's just talk about this for a second. The Pew Charitable Trust came out with a research study several months ago now, which said that 1 in 100 adults had been in jail. Think of how much that costs. Now, when you talk about having early learning, education opportunities, being able to be with your family in terms of paid family leave, paid sick days, after school care, all of those things help as the child is growing up, make them less liable to have interactions with the juvenile justice system, less likely to have grade repetitions, as I just said, less likely in their adulthood to have other needs for government entitlement programs. And the list just goes on. And just taking after-school care, which is one of Moms Rising's issues, there are 40,000 kindergartners home alone each day after school in our nation. 40,000. And there are 14 million kids home alone each day after school between the ages of kindergarten K through 12. And studies show that juvenile crime, the most high time of occurrence of juvenile crime is between the hours of 3 p.m. and 6 p.m., which is after school ends and when kids' parents come home. And so having after-school programs helps in so many ways in terms of also saving funds. It helps kids grow up to be healthy kids, but it also helps save the juvenile justice system money, and it helps also with actually stopping grade repetitions because kids are doing, more on track and doing homework. So it's all savings are all over the place.
Well, and that's partly covered in the T of your acronym for television, because I know these days a lot of people can't afford babysitters. They use the television.
Exactly.
So what's the problem with that?
Well, there's no inherent problem. We're not for censorship. I'll say that right out. There's no inherent problem in television. The idea is that parents need more choices than just television alone. Television can be a choice. Who doesn't love a little bit of great TV, right? But I think definitely having some literacy about television in terms of kids learning how to, I'm trying to figure out how early in the morning to say this, but how to be critical thinkers as they watch television, how to deal with the fact that they are being messaged to in terms of advertising, what they should buy, how they should act, dealing with the violence that is on television. The numbers of acts of, violence per hour on kids' television is just outrageously high. And I actually used to know that statistic, and by noon I'll remember it again. But I can't remember it before I have more coffee this morning. It's huge. It's huge. It's something like 100,000 acts of murder have been witnessed by a 6-year-old, just from watching television. So there are great organizations out there. One of them is Common Sense Media. And now, of course, you must go to momsrising.org first. But if you have kids, commonsensemedia.org has great critical questions to discuss with your kids about different programming and different movies, and as well as a great rating system. Because another problem with our television programming in the United States is that the rating system is no longer accurate. And so it's hard for parents to be choose what is best for their kids to be able to watch. So part of what we're going at is more parental choice and more guidance in television programming. But really, even more than that, is actually just offering alternatives to having to plunk down in front of a TV to have your child watch, like after-school programs.
Talk a bit more about where in this country we fall in terms of paid maternity leave and other statistics like that, because you would get the impression from corporate media that we are not necessarily right at the top, but near the top on different things like healthcare and paid maternity leave. Oh,
it's just depressing. So I said earlier, just for a broad view, that in a Harvard and McGill University study of over 170 countries, only 4 don't have some form of paid leave for new moms. And I'll tell you again, the countries, it's a quiz. Right now, if you've been listening the whole time, you have to try in your mind to think, what were the 4? I'll give you a moment. Okay, that's enough. No dead air on radio. But it's Papua New Guinea, Swaziland, Liberia, and the United States. And what this means is this is the MOTHERS acronym and policies are actually connected together. They come together. It's a system of support that is needed, a system of help for families that most other countries have and that we do not. So what this means is without paid family medical leave, many new parents have to quit needed jobs that they need to put food on the table. Remember, going back to that statistic, a full quarter of families with kids under 6 are living in poverty. So many of those families have had to quit a job that they need. And what happens is they end up in a downward economic spiral. And that's where we come back into another statistic. We're weaving all these statistics together. Yes, I'm a statistics geek, but we can weave them. And that is where we come into the statistic that having a baby is a leading cause of a poverty spell. So another statistic that comes in, and I have admitted my statistic geekiness, is that according to the World Health Organization, the United States ranks 37th a low 37th in infant mortality. We have an extremely high infant mortality rate for an industrialized nation. Frankly, for any place, but definitely for an industrialized nation. And paid family medical leave is proven to decrease the infant mortality rate by 25%. That's huge. That's a quarter of the kids who are dying, for lack of a better word. I mean, it's just horrible, being able to make it. One of the reasons is that parents are more able to breastfeed when they are home with the baby. They are more able to figure out, how that baby's health is doing and be more responsive. And just that early bonding time is critical. The early bonding time is also critical for early learning opportunities. So we go over into early learning. I will tell you that Canada, our neighbor to the north, gives about a year of paid leave to new parents, and they are considering expanding that to 2 years. And the reason is they are on a single-payer healthcare system, and they are finding that the long-term cost savings to having people be able to be there when their children are young is actually saving the nation money later. So it's connected, this one issue, paid family leave, is connected in so many ways to so many other issues. It's connected to equal pay, fair pay, people having to quit jobs. It's connected to healthcare. It's connected to early learning. It's connected to infant mortality. And it sort of spirals out and lets you see how we could end up in the situation that we are with families so much struggling. And the irony of the whole situation is that it doesn't really take that much to fix this problem. Most other countries have passed paid family medical leave. Their economies are doing a little bit better than ours, and they're able to raise healthier kids. And the kids really are the economic engine of our future, beside it being the right thing to do. It's also the economically better thing to do.
Do you know in some of those situations with the paid leave, do they then come back to the same job that they had? Mm-hmm. So the employer holds that position for them while they're gone? Yes,
and that does happen quite regularly. In Washington State, what the paid leave is only 5 weeks. We'd love it to be longer, but we'll take what we can get. And the employer holds the position while they're gone. Now, this has some positives for businesses, I will tell you right now. One of the issues is that it costs businesses a tremendous amount of money to do recruitment and retraining. And so when you have employees that are trained and are doing a spectacular job in their jobs who are now having to quit for a fairly short interruption in their labor force time compared to, the overall time that they will be in the labor force, that costs the company money. And so holding that job opened, it really does save the company money. And you can look at other policies too, not just paid family medical leave, but when we look at, for example, paid sick days, there's 140 countries who guarantee a minimum number of paid sick days. And I'm sure right now you can guess that there is one that we might be sitting in right now that does not. And that guess would be accurate. The United States does not. And in that instance, that is for much shorter leave. It's maybe 5 days per year. We're not talking, weeks. We're talking 5 days per year. And that's another area where, believe it or not, 48% of private sector workers don't have a single paid sick day that they could take for themselves or their children. But nearly 80% of low-income workers have none. So what this means, again, people have to quit needed jobs in order to care for themselves or a sick kid, even if it's just for a day or two. And people end up in a downward economic spiral that hurts them and it hurts their companies. And we also end up with what's called presenteeism, which is people coming to work sick, getting everybody else sick. And then, instead of the company or the employer having one person who's, not able to work because they're sick, they've got like the whole office. So it's all bad. And we're actually working at the national level right now to pass the Healthy Families Act, which is a national law to guarantee a minimum number of paid sick days.
Well, you mentioned low-paid jobs and workers. Talk about childcare, because people who are caring for our children are the lowest, or just about the lowest paid people in the country.
Yeah, the average salary of a childcare worker is about $18,000 per year. So we have a significant problem, as many people know, with our childcare system and our early learning system, actually. And that is that right now, 3/4 of moms are in the labor force. And this is a huge, huge difference than even a generation ago. But what has happened, as you've probably guessed if you've been listening this whole time, doing the MOTHER stretch and, thinking about these issues with us this morning, is that our country's policies and programs haven't caught up to where we are in the labor force. The majority of families right now actually need 2 working parents in the labor force in order to put food on the table and pay the rent or the mortgage. There's not a choice for many families of having one parent be home. And in fact, census studies show that families with a parent at home are 7 times more likely to live in poverty than those with 2 parents in the labor force, which makes sense when you think about it. But because of that, what happens is that with our policies and our programs not catching up to having moms in the labor force, we are struggling with all of these areas, but early learning and childcare in particular, because the cost of early learning for parents is incredibly high. It's between $4,000 and $10,000 per kid per year. And at the same time, what you just brought up is absolutely true. The childcare workers are some of the lowest paid workers in our nation, and so the turnover is incredibly high, which is not good for educational continuity for the kids. And so we have a situation where there was a study that happened fairly recently that found that, 14% of childcare centers or early learning centers are excellent, 12% are harmful, and the rest are in the middle. And so we really think that we need more than just the middle for our kids. And that early learning time is so critical. I mean, the brains of children in that time are just blooming with growth and with learning and, really making all of those connections that are so important for a lifetime of learning. And the problem is that we're between a rock and a hard place. Parents can't afford to pay more. Thus, childcare workers are paid so low. And we really need to seriously reform our early learning system, maybe somewhat toward like what they have right down there in Fort Lewis. The Department of Defense has over 200,000 kids in their care. They have a sliding scale of what the parent pays based on their income. They have an awesome early learning program where their early learning teachers are paid commensurate with other similar military positions instead of being paid at the low of the lows. And they also have an amazing training program for those teachers that allows them to go through tiers of training and to have also unified criteria for what is good in terms of early learning for kids, in terms of curriculum, in terms of learning. And so we know it's possible in this country to create an amazing early learning system. And in fact, the Department of Defense has done it. And we are really looking forward to the time when we can expand that out to everybody else. Is that the longest answer to a question ever?
No, that's actually inspiring that there's something within the military that we could expand out to the civilian level.
Hopefully.
So.
Sign on with momsrising.org and help us do it. It's going to take up a lot of us.
So what's your response to these different programs that you list off? They all sound like they're going to cost a lot of money. And it's going to cost either the employers or the taxpayers. What's your response to that? Well,
throughout our conversation, we've been talking about how it's going to save us money later. So my first response is that, sure, it's going to be an early investment, but, it's going to have a hugely high return. How many investments can you say is guaranteed to bring at least $7 to the dollar back? I mean, very few, right? Especially right now. Let's think about this. Most people are losing money. So this is an investment that economically is a good investment. It's also, must I say, morally a good investment. I mean, children are our next generation. They're the people who are going to run our country next. And we really, really need excellent leaders. We need people who are working in lots of different ways that are great at their jobs. And we need to make those investments in our kids so that we have a next generation that is thriving. We also, might I say, need to help the families and the mothers. I mean, this wage gap is out of control. It is the year 2008. It is not the 1950s. And we really have to solve this wage gap. And when we look at when we pass these policies and programs that do solve the wage gap, not solve, I shouldn't say solve, they don't fully solve, but it gets us a lot closer to where we should be. We see that the levels of families in poverty requiring other assistance programs goes down dramatically. So we're saving money there as well. When we bring women and families out of poverty, we're saving money in terms of other government entitlement programs that they do need. So, I just love all of these programs and think they're absolutely needed and know that they save money and that they're the right thing to do. We can look at other countries who have passed these policies, and they have not sunk into the ocean of, economic instability. They're doing great.
So are any of these issues coming up in the current election talk amongst either the presidential candidates or, the other positions?
Absolutely. I am so delighted to say that we have seen these issues come up in this campaign cycle at the presidential level, and we have candidates who really do get it. They get it that this is an issue. Moms Rising members have taken over 1 million trackable actions toward furthering these issues in the last year alone. That's a crazy amount of action. Right now, we have a situation where so many people are experiencing the same problems at the exact same time that there's sort of a consciousness raising going on that, wow, this is not an epidemic of personal failings. This is an area of economic security that needs to be addressed by our nation. And so with that, we've seen MomsRising.org has done this really fun candidate bingo game throughout this presidential election cycle where we watch the nomination speeches, and we have a great bingo card. It has MOTHERS across the top. We don't make people do the MOTHER stretch while they do it, but they do have a pencil. So there's, interaction here. And as the candidates say each of the issue titles, they make a little mark on their bingo card. And so we're tracking and scoring how the candidates are speaking to the issues. And I can tell you, Obama has gotten a bingo a number of times. Now, McCain, not so much. But we have given him extra points for talking about his mother. So there is a candidate out there. Moms Rising does not endorse. But in our bingo tracking, there is a candidate who is really coming through with speaking to these issues and recognizing that addressing these issues is important to the economic security of our nation. This is not just important to me, Kristin, who has 2 kids. This is important to the economic security of our entire nation. And that's important for us to address together.
And do you see the bulk of these being solved at the federal level, or is the state also involved?
This is a multi-tiered, there's many tiers of solutions that need to be addressed here. So yes, at the federal level, yes, at the state level. We need, and some of these are not even policy solutions that need to be passed legislatively. For example, what we didn't talk about was the lovely O for open, flexible workplaces. That just means that businesses would have a policy change in their personnel policy to allow open, flexible work, which when I first started researching this issue area and writing about it, I thought it just meant not working. What does flexible work mean? And, maybe there's just one way of flexible work, which means fewer hours. But that's actually not true. There's as many different ways to do flexible work as there are job descriptions and job titles. And the wonderful thing about it is that here we find, again, that studies show that companies that do offer flexible work options, which often are called results only, some of them are results only environments, so that the employers are looking at the results of the work and not necessarily when the work happens. Some are looking at you can work the same hours, but, heck, maybe you work better between midnight and 3 a.m. when your kids are asleep or, it's very important to look at lots of different ways to work. But the bottom line is that companies that do provide this, study after study show, have better employee performance. So they're getting more out of their employees. They have way better retention because nobody wants to quit a job that has flexible work options. And we've seen an increasing number of companies using these personnel policies to actually recruit in a higher quality of worker that, frankly, they can pay less to that person than many companies have told us because they offer the flexible work opportunities. So as the baby boomers retire and we have an increasingly competitive labor market, we're going to see more of these policies being rolled out because they are excellent recruitment tools for the employers.
All right. With that, I want to thank you very much for coming in and spending time with us this morning.
Thank you.
Again, just talking with Kristin Rowe-Finkbeiner, Executive Director of MomsRising.org and author of the Motherhood Manifesto.